The invitation. Marcus Carter sat at his worn wooden kitchen table, staring at the envelope that lay unopened beneath a small pile of bills and grocery store flyers. His 6-year-old daughter's drawings were scattered across the refrigerator, toy crayon suns, shaky stick figures, and a rainbow that curved crookedly but proudly across the page. The envelope stood out, pale blue with a neat gold crest embossed in the top corner. The letters spelled out words he hadn't seen in years. Rutherford Academy Alumni Committee cordially invites you to the class of 2010 reunion. For a foire. Long moment. Marcus simply looked at it, fingers tracing the raised design as though the paper itself carried weight from the past. He didn't need to open it to know what it was about. He already knew. It wasn't just an invitation. It was a ghost reaching across a decade, daring him to return to a place he had fought hard to leave behind. The sound of tiny Lego blocks clinking on the floor broke his heavy thoughts. Jada, his daughter, sat cross-legged on the rug in the living room, building what looked like a crooked tower that leaned precariously to one side. She hummed softly as she worked, her soft curls bouncing around her face, her concentration absolute. Marcus allowed himself a smile, though his mind still swam. He had been only 17 when he graduated Rutherford. 17, quiet, awkward, and the only black kid in nearly every class. For 4 long years he had been the punchline to their jokes, the outsider nobody wanted on their team, the easy target in a school where appearances meant everything. He had been called loser, charity case, nobody. They had mocked his thrift store shoes, his secondhand backpack, the way he stayed silent instead of snapping back. Back then, silence was his shield. Now, years later, he wore it like armor. He picked up the envelope again, considering what it really meant. Did they expect him to come back as the same Marcus they remembered? Quiet, timid, easy to laugh at? The thought of those familiar faces smirking, leaning back with champagne glasses in hand, waiting for him to stumble into the spotlight so they could get one more laugh at his expense. It burned in his chest. And yet beneath that old ache, there was something else. A calm certainty that he wasn't the same boy anymore. Life had forged him into someone entirely different. Someone none of them could imagine. "Daddy," Jada said suddenly, holding up her lopsided Lego tower. "Look, it's almost as tall as me." Marcus blinked and laughed softly, the heaviness lifting just a little. "Almost, baby girl. But remember, if you want it taller, you have to make it stronger at the bottom." He nodded with exaggerated seriousness and began reinforcing the lower blocks, her small hands steady with focus. Marcus leaned back in his chair, watching her, and for a moment he thought about why he worked the way he did, why he spent long nights bent over code, why he balanced meetings with laundry, contracts with bedtime stories. It wasn't about money, though he had more of it now than he ever dreamed possible back in high school. It was about her. Every sacrifice, every quiet victory, every sleepless night. It was all so she could grow up without the weight he had carried. He wanted her to know she was strong, loved, and safe. His phone buzzed on the table, pulling him back. A reminder popped up. Investor call at 9:01 a.m. tomorrow. He dismissed it quickly, careful not to let Jada see. She didn't know what he did, not really. To her, Daddy worked on a computer and sometimes wore a tie when he had to meet the important people. She didn't need to know that the important people were CEOs of tech firms, bankers, and venture capitalists who respected Marcus more than his classmates ever had. They saw him for his brilliance, his innovation, and his quiet leadership in the world of artificial intelligence infrastructure. The world outside Rutherford knew him as a rising star in the tech sector, a man who had built his company from scratch and turned it into a powerhouse worth more than $100 million. But at home, he was just Daddy, the one who checked her homework, braided her hair on clumsy mornings, and kissed her forehead goodnight. Marcus reached for the envelope again, tearing it open at last. The details spilled across the cardstock in neat fonts. Banquet hall, Rutherford Academy, Friday evening at 7. Formal attire preferred. He almost laughed at the phrase. Formal attire. They probably expected polished shoes, a tailored suit, maybe even a luxury watch glinting in the light. Marcus owned all of that. He had racks of fine suits, a collection of watches that investors had gifted him, and a wardrobe that could rival any of the men who once mocked him. But a strange stubbornness flared inside him. He wouldn't go there to perform wealth. He wouldn't go there to prove a point with silk and shine. If he went, he would go exactly as he was, quiet, simple, unpolished on the surface. Let them think what they wanted. "Daddy, can I watch 10 more minutes of cartoons if I finish this tower?" Jada's voice floated into his thoughts again. Marcus chuckled. "Only if you brush your teeth first and say please to Mrs. Evans when she brings over the cookies tomorrow." Her giggle rang like music and he nodded, the heaviness easing again. He glanced at the clock. The reunion was 2 nights away. He yet had time to decide. He could stay home safe in his world, far away from the ghosts of Rutherford. Or he could go, not for them, but for himself, for the boy he once was, and for the daughter who would one day ask about his past. He wanted to tell her that he had faced it, not hidden from it, that he had looked his old wounds in the eye and found peace. He dialed a number, and his neighbor answered warmly. "Marcus, hey, everything all right?" "Yeah, sorry to bother you. Could you watch Jada Friday evening, just for a few hours?" "Of course," she replied. "You know she's always welcome. Don't worry, we'll take good care of her." Marcus thanked her. His heart lightened. He hung up, stood, and walked to the small mirror by the door. A tired man looked back at him, dark circles under his eyes, but steady, calm, unshaken. He wore a faded hoodie and jeans, and there was nothing about him that screamed success, but he didn't need it to. True strength never shouted. It was silent, steady, and unbreakable. He pressed his palm flat against the mirror, breathing slowly. The boy who once walked through Rutherford's halls had been afraid of his reflection. The man who stood there now wasn't afraid of anything. Outside, drizzle began to fall against the street lamp's glow, soft and steady. Marcus pulled the invitation into his jacket pocket, locked the door, and stepped into the night. Whatever waited at the reunion, he would face it, not with anger, not with revenge, but with the quiet dignity of a man who had built his life brick by brick, not for applause, but for love. Walking into the fire Friday evening arrived with a cold drizzle that made the city shimmer under the glow of street lamps. Marcus Carter adjusted the hood of his faded sweatshirt as he stepped out of the cab and onto the sidewalk in front of Rutherford Academy's banquet hall. The building rose tall and proud, its white stone facade glowing against the rain-slicked night. Gold balloons floated in an archway above the doors, swaying slightly in the wind. A banner stretched across the entrance in bold letters, "Class of 2010 Reunion, presented by Summit Gatherings." Marcus paused at the curb, his reflection rippling faintly in the wet pavement, and for just a moment, he felt the years collapse in on themselves. It was as though he was 17 again, standing in the shadows of the school, hearing the echo of sneakers on polished floors, the sting of laughter thrown casually over shoulders that never looked back. He drew a slow breath, squared his shoulders, and walked toward the glow of the hall. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and champagne. Strings of warm lights twinkled across the ceiling, and a long table held neat rows of name tags printed in careful fonts. Marcus found his, Marcus Carter, and pinned it quietly to his hoodie. The safety pin snagged briefly on a loose thread, but he didn't flinch. He set the tag straight, then looked around the room, scanning faces that had once been fixtures in his nightmares. Brooke Whitman, her blonde hair styled into a wave of perfection, floated across the room in a designer dress, her laugh sharp as crystal. Chase Walker, broad-shouldered and smug, leaned heavily on the bar as though it were his throne, spinning stories to anyone who would listen. Tyler Voss, always the class clown, clutched a microphone and scribbled notes on index cards with the eagerness of a man rehearsing jokes he thought were clever. As Marcus entered, a ripple moved through the crowd. Some people glanced at him and quickly turned away, whispering behind hands. Others looked him up and down openly, smirking at his simple clothes. "Vintage," one voice said behind a glass of wine. "Still the same," another muttered. The old names floated through the air like ghosts: loser, charity case, outcast. Marcus heard them all without flinching. He poured himself a glass of water from the table at the side of the room and sat at a corner table half in shadow, calm as if he had trained his nerves to move in soundproof silence. The evening began with a slideshow flashing across the screen at the front of the hall. Then and now, the title card announced. Photos of classmates flickered by. Ryan Grant, once the lacrosse team captain, now proudly holding a golf trophy. Haley Brooks, former prom queen, now managing her own spa. Brooke with her Pilates studio. Chase boasting about his latest startup, his arm slung casually around an expensive car. Laughter and applause filled the room like canned laughter in a sitcom. Every image was followed by the same pattern: cheers, clinks of champagne, glasses, exaggerated smiles that strained at the edges. Marcus leaned back, his hands folded loosely in his lap. He remembered these faces not as polished adults but as teenagers with cruel smiles and sharper words. He remembered Brooke sneering at his shoes, Tyler rapping humiliating verses about him in the cafeteria, Chase shoving his books into lockers. He remembered standing silent, clutching his backpack like a shield, counting the minutes until the final bell. For years, those moments had dug trenches in his spirit, but tonight, as he watched them cheer themselves, he realized something remarkable. Those moments no longer had power over him. At the bar, Chase swiped his card for another round of drinks. The machine beeped, a sound sharp enough to pierce through the chatter. The bartender tilted the screen, politely hiding the word, "declined." Two men near the counter murmured under their breath. Chase's app crashed again. Investors won't touch it anymore. Marcus caught the exchange without moving a muscle, filing it away like a quiet log in the background. Tyler tapped the mic, his grin wide. "All right, everyone, let's get this party going. We've got some awards tonight: best glow up, biggest boss energy, most likely to own a private island." The crowd cheered on cue. Tyler's jokes rolled out, some landing, most falling flat. The laughter that followed was more habit than humor, the kind of noise people made when they didn't want to look out of place. Marcus watched it all as though it were lines of code scrolling past a screen. Predictable, repetitive, shallow. Then Tyler paused, flipping to the final card. His grin grew sly. "And our last award tonight, honorable mention most likely. To still be different. Marcus Carter, are you here?" The spotlight swung across the room, landing directly on Marcus's table. The laughter bubbled instantly. Snickers, whispers, a few outright chuckles. Heads swiveled, waiting to see what he would do. Marcus rose slowly, the wooden scrape of his chair louder than the applause. He didn't smile, didn't flinch, didn't even pretend to be amused. He met Tyler's gaze across the room and said just one word: "Thank you." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. No joke followed. No smile softened the word. Marcus sat, back down, calm as water, while the crowd shifted uneasily. Tyler fumbled with his cards, forcing a laugh, moving on too quickly. The atmosphere never quite recovered. Marcus poured himself another glass of water, watching the condensation form, a ring on the tablecloth. He dipped his finger into it, drawing the circle wider until it blurred, then wiped it away with his sleeve. Another circle would form soon enough, he thought. That was the nature of shallow things. They came and went, never touching the core. As the night wore on, Marcus remained quiet, observing. He noticed the cracks spreading beneath the polished surfaces. Brooke's laughter a little too sharp, her glass refilled a little too often. Tyler's jokes faltering as fewer people laughed. Chase's stories growing thinner each time he told them, his phone glowing in his hand with messages he ignored. Marcus said nothing, but he saw everything. And slowly, those who mocked him began to sense it, that he wasn't the same boy they once knew, and that the silence he carried now was heavier than their noise. The turning point. The evening stretched on, and the banquet hall swelled with a kind of false energy, the kind that relied on laughter that was too loud, compliments that were too rehearsed, and stories that fell apart the moment anyone asked for details. The chandeliers above cast a warm golden glow over tables laden with champagne glasses and silverware polished to mirror shine. Beneath the glitter, however, Marcus Carter could feel the strain in the room. the cracks running quietly through, the lives of the very people who once believed they would rule the world. He sat at his corner table, calm, steady, silent, as though he had been waiting all along for the moment when the noise would falter. Tyler Voss, still clutching the microphone like a lifeline, was determined to keep the laughter alive. He bounced around the room, shoving the mic in front of classmates and tossing out improvised questions that he thought were funny. "Tell us your craziest success story," he demanded of Ryan Grant, who stumbled through a tale of buying into a golf resort that everyone knew had gone bankrupt. "Who here has been on TV?" he asked another, who meekly admitted to appearing once in the background of a morning show. The crowd laughed, clapped, and sipped their drinks, but the rhythm was broken now, fractured by the uncomfortable silence that Marcus had left hanging in the air earlier when he said only, "Thank you," to Tyler's mocking award. It had been just one word, but it carried more weight than all the cheap laughter combined. Marcus sipped his water, the condensation ring spreading again on the tablecloth. His mind flickered back, unbidden, to his first months out of high school. He had graduated with no money, no connections, and a reputation in his classmates' eyes as someone destined for failure. He remembered the long nights working in a grocery store stockroom, lifting crates until his back ached, coming home to a tiny one-bedroom apartment where the silence pressed down heavier than the boxes he had carried all day. It was during those nights that he began teaching himself coding, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a borrowed laptop, studying open-source projects until the early hours of the morning. He remembered the exhaustion that clung to him like a second skin, but also the spark that refused to die, a spark that told him knowledge could change everything. When his daughter was born 2 years later, that spark became a fire. Her mother left soon after, unable to handle the weight of responsibility, and Marcus suddenly found himself a single father at 21. He remembered holding the tiny, squalling baby in his arms, terrified and awestruck all at once, whispering to her that he would never leave her no matter what. From that moment on, every sleepless night, every coding session, every freelance project he scraped together to pay the bills, it was all for her. He had sworn he would build something strong enough to protect her future, even if the world expected nothing of him. A burst of laughter snapped him back to the present. Tyler had just delivered another jab, this time about someone's receding hairline. The crowd laughed, but Marcus noticed the man's stiff smile, the way his hand tightened around his glass. It was a performance, and everyone in the room was part of it, everyone except Marcus, who refused to play. Then, as though sensing the unease that lingered, Tyler's grin sharpened again. "Hey, Carter," he called suddenly, his voice echoing over the speakers. "You're being quiet back there, man. Come on, share something with us. What have you been up to these last few years? Don't tell me you're still hiding behind that hoodie." The crowd turned, eager again for the familiar target. Marcus felt the weight of dozens of eyes, the hush that followed, the anticipation of another punchline at his expense. He did not move quickly. He set his glass down first, wiped his fingers on the napkin, and then slowly rose to his feet. He didn't walk to the microphone, didn't take center stage. He simply stood at his table, his voice calm, even, steady. "I've been raising my daughter," he said. The words landed with unexpected force. No embellishment, no attempt at humor, no explanation beyond the truth. Just 5 simple words, and the hall went strangely quiet. For a moment, no one knew how to respond. Tyler laughed awkwardly, but the sound was too thin. "Oh, come on, man, that's all. You've been, what, babysitting for 6 years?" He chuckled at his own joke, but only a few scattered laughs followed. Marcus's gaze didn't waver. Not babysitting, being a father. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but the conviction in his voice made several people shift uncomfortably in their seats. There was something in his tone, something that spoke of nights no one else in that room could imagine, of sacrifices made in silence, of strength built far away from the hollow approval they all seemed to crave. For the first time that evening, the balance of the room shifted. The laughter felt forced. The spotlight, meant to humiliate, had illuminated something none of them were prepared to see. Brooke Whitman, always quick to turn attention back to herself, tried to break the tension. "Well, that's admirable, Marcus," she said with a smile that never touched her eyes. "But surely you've been doing something else? A little job here and there, something to keep the lights on?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He sat back down, poured himself another glass of water, and let the silence stretch just long enough for people to feel it. Then he replied, his tone still calm. "I've been working, yes, but I'll let my daughter's future speak for what I've built." Again, no details, no boasts, just quiet certainty. The room grew restless. Some exchanged glances. Others pretended to check their phones. Tyler tried to recover, moving the microphone quickly to another table, but the damage was done. The momentum of the night had shifted. Marcus leaned back in his chair, folding his arms loosely. He didn't need to fight them. He didn't need to prove anything. The cracks were widening on their own. Chase's card kept failing at the bar. Brooke's smile grew tighter with each refill. Tyler's jokes grew more desperate as the laughter dwindled. One by one, their masks were slipping, and Marcus remained the one person in the room who didn't need a mask at all. He thought again of Jada, of the way she had looked up at him earlier that day with wide eyes, asking if he would be okay at the reunion. "They used to be mean to you, didn't they, Daddy?" she had asked. He had kissed her forehead and told her not to worry. Now, sitting in the half-shadow of the banquet hall, he realized that everything he had endured, all the names, the laughter, the humiliation, had prepared him for this exact moment. The boy they once mocked was gone. In his place was a man who had nothing to prove and everything to protect. The banquet continued, but the mood was different now. The noise had thinned, the laughter cracked. And though Marcus had said very little, his presence filled the room like a quiet storm gathering strength. They didn't know it yet, but the turning point had already come, and the night would never belong to them again. The revelation, the night at Rutherford's banquet hall had stretched like a taut string, laughter and chatter rattling over the surface while something heavier churned beneath. Marcus Carter remained in his quiet corner, his calm presence like a stone dropped into shallow water, small ripples spreading out, disrupting the false smoothness. He hadn't raised his voice once, hadn't bragged, hadn't tried to fight, back against the small jabs and sideways glances, and yet somehow the entire room now revolved around his silence. His classmates, dressed in their tailored suits and glittering dresses, leaned into one another, whispering with unease, as though trying to reassure themselves that they still belonged at the center of their old social universe. But the old universe was gone. Brooke Whitman returned to her seat with her glass of champagne, but the laughter she forced between sips grew brittle, her eyes darting toward Marcus more often than she would admit. Tyler Voss kept spinning jokes, his voice rising as the crowd's response dwindled. Chase Walker had stepped outside to take a phone call, pacing in the drizzle, his face lit by the blue glow of his phone, his shoulders stiff with tension. Marcus observed it all, sipping his water, steady as if he were in control of an orchestra, only he could hear. When the dinner plates were cleared and the music shifted to a softer background hum, the organizers announced the final portion of the night, acknowledgments and sponsor recognition. Tyler returned to the microphone, shuffling through his stack of cards with an eagerness that was beginning to fray at the edges. "Before we wrap up," he said, flashing a grin that looked more like a mask now, "we'd like to thank our sponsors for making this night possible. Without them, well, we'd all just be sitting in a school gym with boxed lunches, right?" The crowd chuckled politely. Tyler pulled up the last card, then froze for half a second too long. His grin faltered. The card was blank. He shuffled to the next one. Also blank. A crease appeared on his forehead. "Ah, well," he stammered. "Our sponsors prefer to remain anonymous tonight, but let's give them a big round of applause anyway." His words tried to be light, but the silence that followed was too heavy. The applause that eventually came was scattered, hesitant, like raindrops on tin. And in that fragile pause, Marcus stood, the scrape of his chair against the polished floor, was louder than the applause, sharper than the music. Heads turned instantly. His simple hoodie and scuffed shoes looked almost out of place beneath the chandeliers, but there was a gravity to the way he carried himself that pulled every eye toward him. He walked slowly toward the stage, not rushing, not seeking the spotlight, but stepping into it because it was time. Tyler blinked, unsure whether to joke or retreat. Marcus, did you want to—" Marcus didn't reach for the microphone. He didn't need it. His voice, though calm, carried across the hall with a clarity that silenced the murmurs. "You don't need to thank anonymous sponsors," he said. "The sponsor for tonight is me." The room froze. Forks paused halfway to mouths, glasses stopped in midair, whispers cut off like wires severed. For a long moment there was no sound but the faint hum of the speakers. Marcus's gaze swept the room, steady and unflinching. When the committee reached out, they didn't know if they'd have the funds to book this hall, to pay for catering, or to put on anything more than a small gathering. I covered the difference, quietly, anonymously, because this night was never about me, it was about all of us. But since we're here, let me be clear. I don't need an award, or applause, or anyone's approval. His words hung in the air, each one deliberate, unhurried. I came tonight because I wanted to close a chapter, not out of bitterness, not for revenge, but because I refused to let the boy you mocked, the one you dismissed, carry your shadows any longer. The silence thickened, pressing against the walls of the hall. Then Chase re-entered from outside, his phone still in hand, his jaw tight. "That's cute," he sneered too loudly, desperate to reclaim ground. "But covering a party bill doesn't mean you're special, Marcus. We all know the kind of guy you were. Quiet, broke, scared. Some things don't change." Marcus turned his gaze to him, calm as stone. "You're right," he said. "Some things don't change. I'm still quiet. I'm still calm. I still don't need to prove anything. But what has changed is this. While you laughed, while you doubted, I built something real. Something strong enough to give my daughter a future. Something you can't see because you measure success in applause and show. I measure it in responsibility." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone near the front whispered, "Wait, Carter Tech? Isn't that his company?" Another gasped, recognition dawning. "The AI infrastructure firm? The one valued at over $100 million? The legacy." The banquet hall was no longer the same place it had been when Marcus Carter first walked in, wearing his faded hoodie and quiet expression. Hours earlier, his classmates had looked at him with smirks, confident in their own stories of success, eager to laugh once again at the boy who had once been their easy target. But now the air was heavier, the chatter subdued, the false laughter silenced. The revelation of who Marcus had become, what he had built, and the quiet dignity with which he had carried himself through years of struggle, had shifted the very gravity of the room. Marcus sat in his corner, no longer invisible but no less calm. People glanced his way with expressions they themselves couldn't quite decipher: shame, awe, regret, even envy. He hadn't delivered a grand speech about his wealth. He hadn't paraded numbers or accomplishments. He had said only what mattered, and it was enough to shatter their illusions. His silence now seemed louder than Tyler's microphone, louder than Brooks' tinkling laugh, louder than Chase's swagger. The man they had once written off as nothing had changed the entire room without raising his voice. Some classmates tried to recover. A few approached Marcus cautiously, as if he were no longer the same person they had known. One man extended his hand, stammering something about always knowing Marcus would turn out okay. Marcus shook his hand politely, offering nothing more than a nod. Brooke drifted over with her champagne glass half full, her smile faltering under the weight of her own guilt. "Marcus," she said softly, "you really surprised us tonight. I guess we didn't see you clearly back then." Marcus met her gaze, but his eyes gave away nothing. "Most people didn't," he replied. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't going to offer her the comfort of forgiveness on demand. Some lessons were meant to linger. Chase, however, could not let go of his pride. He re-entered the room after another failed call outside, his jaw set tight. He looked at Marcus across the room, his expression defiant. But there was no laughter in his eyes anymore. He tried once loudly to make a joke about hoodie millionaires and how Marcus must have just gotten lucky, but the silence that followed drowned him faster than any rebuttal Marcus could have given. Even his closest circle of friends didn't laugh. They were done laughing at Marcus because the joke had turned back on them. Eventually, the night drew to a close. People collected their coats, signed guest books, hugged old friends with a little less confidence than before. Marcus lingered, not out of hesitation but out of patience, watching the last of them filter out beneath the arch of gold balloons. He didn't need their apologies. He didn't need their admiration. He had come to close a door, and the door was closed. As he stepped out into the cool night, drizzle tapping softly on his hood, he felt lighter than he had in years. The cab ride home was quiet, the city lights streaking across the window like faint trails of memory. Marcus leaned back against the seat, thinking of the years that had led him here. He thought of the stockroom shifts after high school, the endless nights teaching himself code with nothing but determination to keep him awake. He thought of holding Jada in his arms when she was just an infant, whispering promises he didn't know how to keep but swore he would anyway. He thought of the investors who had dismissed him, the clients who had underestimated him, the moments he had nearly given up but didn't. Every sacrifice, every step, had carried him from the boy mocked in high school to the man who walked out of that banquet hall tonight steady and unshaken. When he arrived home, the apartment was dark except for the soft glow of the nightlight in Jada's room. Mrs. Evans, the kind neighbor who often helped watch her, greeted Marcus at the door with a warm smile. "She fell asleep an hour ago," she whispered. "She was excited to tell me all about her Lego tower. She said she made it stronger at the bottom, just like you taught her." Marcus's chest warmed. He thanked her sincerely, walked her to the door, and then stood in the quiet of his home. He stepped into Jada's room and found her curled up under her blanket, her stuffed tiger tucked safely beneath her arm. For a moment, Marcus simply watched her sleep, her small breath steady, her curls spilling across the pillow. The weight of the evening, of the past, of every ghost he had faced, slipped away as he looked at her. This was his legacy. Not the wealth, not the recognition, not the empire he had built, but this, his daughter, safe, loved, and growing into a world where she would never have to doubt her worth. Jada stirred softly, blinking her eyes open when she sensed his presence. "Daddy?" she murmured sleepily. "I'm here," Marcus said softly, sitting on the edge of her bed. Her eyes fluttered wider, curious even in her drowsiness. "Were they nice to you at your school party?" Marcus paused. The question cut deeper than she could know. He thought of the banquet hall, of the mocking smiles that had faded into silence, of the arrogance that had crumbled when faced with truth. He thought of his classmates, some ashamed, some humbled, some unchanged. And then he looked at his daughter, her eyes full of innocence, and he knew what answer he wanted her to carry with her. They were learning, he said gently. "Some people need time to understand what matters. But I didn't go there for them, I went there for us. To show you that we don't run from our past. We face it, and we keep building taller and stronger just like your Lego towers." Jada smiled sleepily and nestled closer to her stuffed tiger. "You're the best, Daddy." Marcus leaned down and kissed her forehead. "No, sweetheart. I'm just a man who loves you. That's all I ever wanted to be." She drifted back into sleep, her tiny hand resting against his arm, and Marcus sat for a long while, the quiet of the room wrapping around him like a balm. Outside the city hummed, restless and bright, but in this small space everything was exactly as it should be. He rose eventually, stepping back into the kitchen. The invitation from Rutherford still sat on the table where he had left it, now folded and worn from his pocket. He picked it up, studied it for a final moment, and then dropped it into the recycling bin. That chapter was finished. He didn't need to hold on to it anymore. The future stretched out ahead of him, not measured in millions of dollars or accolades, But in mornings making breakfast for Jada, evenings helping her with homework, nights tucking her into bed with stories of heroes who kept their promises, he would keep building not because of what anyone else thought, but because that was what real strength meant. Responsibility, love, and persistence. At Rutherford, his classmates had finally seen a glimpse of who Marcus Carter had become. But here, in the quiet of his home, his daughter saw all of him every single day. That was the only audience that mattered. And as Marcus turned off the lights and settled into the couch with a tired but contented sigh, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Legacies weren't built in banquet halls or measured by applause. They were built in the steady, unseen moments of love and sacrifice, brick by brick, promise by promise. And in that truth, Marcus had already won.